I'm sure most people who've heard of Godzilla know that since its inception, this guy has been thematically connected to the nuclear bomb, a metaphor for the atomic blasts at the end of the Second World War and their fallout, the continued bomb tests in the Pacific during the Cold War, the existential dread heralded by their existence, and the collective trauma of the Japanese nation after becoming the only country to have ever been the target of such a horrifying weapon. Things are a little bit different though in this new movie called Godzilla -1. Here, Godzilla does not appear in a post-war 1950s Japan as a result of American nuclear tests, but instead, it makes its first appearance in the final days of World War II. At this point in the war, even without the nukes, the US forces are truly terrifying, the largest and most powerful navy in the history of the world, launching frequent bombing raids on the Japanese home islands while getting closer day by day. It's an unstoppable, destructive force, and yet the Japanese continue to fight. The leaders of the Japanese military, despite knowing there is nothing they can do to win, have resolved to make this a fight to the death for the Japanese people, and instilled in them a mindset of death over defeat and dishonor. This military culture is displayed most clearly in the Kamikaze pilots, who the Japanese commanders send out in suicide attacks to crash their planes into US ships. But you also see it in the average soldier, willing to rush into hopeless battles, and civilians who continue to support the military and the war effort. All of them actually pointless sacrifices in a war that doesn't need to continue. All efforts by the Japanese military at this point serve only to cause more suffering to the Americans while prolonging the suffering of the Japanese people in the name of honor. This is when Godzilla appears, a massive, terrifyingly destructive force which none of Japan's weapons are able to stop as it gets closer and closer to the mainland, that eventually develops nuclear capabilities. There are two central aspects of this movie's themes: Godzilla, what he represents, and how the people of Japan respond to him. Godzilla in this film is a monstrous manifestation of the US Armada itself, not just the bomb. Warships are tossed through the air and blasts from mines and cannons are shrugged off. Godzilla, like the US Armed Forces by the end of the war, can destroy anything the Japanese throw at it, and replenish any damage with seemingly no effort at all. Our main character, Koichi, is one of the first to see Godzilla. A kamikaze pilot fleeing from the battlefield, he is almost immediately sent back into a battle with no hope of winning, this time against a big lizard. The Japanese response to Godzilla is the same as the war: hopeless, ineffective violence. Koichi has a chance to open fire on the monster from his fighter plane, but just like how he couldn't kill himself in a kamikaze attack, he can't bring himself to shoot Godzilla either, an action that most likely wouldn't have done much to stop the monster, which seconds later effortlessly tosses the Zero fighter through the air. In both cases, many die around him and he is blamed. The only other survivor on the island blames the others' deaths on him refusing to shoot, and when he returns home he is blamed by his neighbor for the deaths of those killed in the Tokyo firebombings, as if him crashing into one American ship would have changed the course of the war. The Americans win, the bombs stop dropping, Godzilla disappears, but Japan will have to deal with the destruction left behind for years to come, and survivors of the war like Koichi will have to struggle with this cultural attitude that they were meant to have died in the war. And then Godzilla shows up again. Japan is no longer at war with America, but Godzilla still represents, or just is, this overwhelming, unstoppable force. And at first, the response is the same as the war: military force. They even send the same ships and tanks after the monster. This doesn't work, people die, it's a repeat of the horrors they had just faced, it sucks. Godzilla now doesn't just represent the American military's advance, but the trauma of Japan. It's still coming back to haunt them, like Koichi's still struggling with his survivor's guilt, wondering what he should have done differently. But clearly, the same direct militarism is not the solution. In order to win against Godzilla, Japan has to change how they plan to deal with him, and to do that, they need to break their militaristic culture of death before defeat and dishonor, and that's what they do. The characters recognize that their government and military had treated them too much like sacrifices, that the mindset that they were meant to die in the war is wrong, that they were not meant to die, they were meant to live. Godzilla's presence thus becomes a chance to rethink and test the values the Japanese people want to promote in their society. They decide to cast off the harmful aspects of their old culture. They can't fight Godzilla like they fought World War II, and they shouldn't have fought that way in the first place. Instead, they set out on disarmed warships and civilian tugboats using a strategy centering on science and engineering. The plan to destroy Godzilla is not run by the military, but by a union of civilians with a common goal. And most importantly, Godzilla is finally taken out by a kamikaze strike in which the pilot is able to eject from his plane, because the people are no longer sacrifices. They are no longer fighting pointlessly to the death, but fighting so that they can live, to make the world better for themselves and for the people around them. Those that survive must not grieve over the fact that they didn't die fighting for their country. There is no honor in dying for a bad cause. Instead, the survivors must look to the future and work to build out of the rubble that was left behind. It is more important that we live. Godzilla has become a very saturated franchise. There's a few gems, but mostly just big monsters for big monsters' sake, and even the good ones have not thematically moved far beyond the bomb. But this Godzilla -1 movie shows that by just shifting the framing a little bit, slightly altering the story's themes to something different but still related to the original, you can tell a powerful new story. By just making Godzilla appear a few years earlier, you can turn it into a story about a broken, defeated people finding the courage to continue living and use the destruction of their world as an opportunity to rethink what the new world should be. And perhaps this story from the other side of the sea can point the rest of us in the same direction, as societies and individuals, to rethink what values we want to promote in the world, to fight battles that truly help each other, and look towards the future.